Let's jump into it by starting with the rubric. We know that this rubric is called the critical study of literature. It's one of the rubrics that is a little bit loose. It's not quite as grounded as human experiences might be, where there are certain terms that you can latch onto that are often recited or synonymized in a question. So individual and collective experiences, paradoxes, all that sort of stuff that you would be aware of from that rubric. For this one, it's not quite as legible or as concrete as some of the other rubrics might be. It's a little bit more up in the air. So we should start to then think about what the purpose of this rubric is, what ultimately the goal is going to be in you writing an essay on T.S. Eliot. Because we're not just conducting any old close analysis of Eliot's poetry, we need to think about what actually goes into a critical study. So we know this module is going to be assessed within the modules paper of paper 2 in both the trials and the HSC. It's ultimately up to you what order you might do these sections in, but oftentimes this Eliot essay ends up being a little bit shorter than perhaps your module A essay. It's not comparative in its analysis, so there are maybe a couple fewer moving parts. If you feel like you needed to then put it at the start, do it early so you can buy yourself some time early. If you're going to get through it a little bit faster, do so. If you feel like it needs to be in the middle and you might do module A first, get through that with all of the content, end with module C because it's a little bit looser, and with the creative pieces, you know, you can probably get away with slightly less content than you might within an essay. Stories always take faster to write anyway, so if you're running out of time a little bit, you can buy some more time with some of these other sections, module B, module C, I think. Now, what does the rubric actually say? So we paint in very broad brushstrokes so far about the rubric, but what is the rubric actually about? Now, the purpose of a critical study is, in my opinion, slightly different to how a close study might work. So in standard English for module B, students do a close study. Now, a close study is one where you're looking at the text in forensic detail, trying to understand how its form works, how the language works, trying to create those links to social context as well. In a critical study, we do all of that. So a critical study contains a close study, and you need that really detailed, thorough understanding of how the text works. But at the same time, there's a little bit more to it than might be in an ordinary close study of literature. And I think what it really boils down to is, in a critical study, not only are we doing all of the close analysis that's needed in any English essay, but we're also trying to think about what about this text transcends time, what resonates with readers today. And what a critical study is trying to get to the heart of is why it's worth studying Eliot's poetry in the first place. Now, that's maybe not so much of a question that's at the forefront of our mind in human experiences, though it's a helpful question to be asking in any study of literature. But in a critical study, it is at the forefront of our mind. Why is it worth studying? How does it resonate with our world today? That's a really interesting point, that there's some parallel there between Prufrock's anxiety and maybe the uncertainty of young people, you know, younger millennials, Zoomers, who are maybe growing up in a world that is perhaps hostile, where there's a lot of uncertainty about your future, a lot of uncertainty about what career paths that you might take. Yeah, I think there's some interesting parallels there when Eliot is writing on the brink of a society where traditional employment or traditional expectations around what people would occupy their lives with might be starting to disintegrate a little bit. Hedonism is there as well in Journey of the Magi, talking about the decadence of the Magi's kingdom and world as a bit of a parallel to the excesses of the 1920s, that post-war celebratory era. I mean, there's been a lot of discourse at the moment about whether post-pandemic there is going to be a similar roaring 20s moment in our society. There are these interesting parallels that can be made between our world and the world in which Eliot, pretty much 100 years ago, is responding to. Now, when we really break down what the rubric says, there are a few key phrases here. So, firstly, analytical and critical knowledge. So, what that means is a balance between your own close analysis and then a consideration of the value of Eliot's poetry. Having that critical lens on why it's worth studying. And the answer to why it's worth studying usually is because it speaks to some concern that still resonates today, whether it is about existential uncertainty, whether it is about materialism and hedonism, whether it is about navigating the maelstrom of modernized urban life. Whatever it might be, there are these connections that can be made and that you can even make in your essay to prove that there is value. They also want you to be considering not just the significance of the text, not just the specific technical qualities of the text, but this concept of its textual integrity. And that's a phrase that doesn't really get defined in the rubric very well. And it's not like it's a phrase that has to be in your essay by any means, but it could be the kind of thing that gets thrown into a question that you'd need to have some understanding of. And my opinion about what textual integrity is it's this point in a text where its form and its content achieves an almost perfect synthesis. So with all of the texts that are on the syllabus for Module B, they are somewhat canonical, meaning it's considered that these texts have a significant place within the history of English language literature. Now, why they have a significant place within the history of English language literature is, yes, because they might speak to some timeless concerns that continue to resonate with us today, but also because there's something novel, something inventive that is going on with the text's forms that demands our continued engagement with these texts. And what we'll be thinking about as we go is how Eliot's poetry has textual integrity because of the way in which its form and its content are in perfect alignment. In other words, that we couldn't imagine Eliot's ideas being successfully communicated through any other form than the fragmented poetry that he writes, the experimental modernist poetry that he composes.